Welcome back to the Lost Info Podcast. As always, it's keeping you awake, Jake.
And Jake.
This case file, we have a special guest, and we'll just break right into it. She's an author, producer, and narrator. She's an author of fiction and nonfiction books. She's a host and narrator of the paranormal talk shows, Stories of the Supernatural, and the podcast shows Nightshade Diary and Supernatural Storytime, and a blog author of Stranger Than Fiction. She holds a Master of Science degree in Human Behavior and Health. She is a certified master hypnotist and considers herself a subconscious behavioralist in the private sector for years. And at one time, she worked as an investigator for a state-level agency. She's a fellow seeker of knowledge, finder of information. Marelne Pardo Pellicer. Is that correct?
That's right.
Welcome.
Wasn't sure if I was going to hit your last name.
No. Don't worry. You said it perfectly. I've had other occasions where that hasn't been the case, but no, You're on the money.
Awesome. Well, I guess where we want to start this off is basically where you're at now and how you got there.
Okay. Well, it's like, if I'm sure if anybody's ever heard anybody that's been interested in ghost hunting or, whether it's legend tripping or research, or they always say, one of two things: either they had childhood experience or they were just interested in it. And that's how I started out. Back when I was growing up, there was Hans Holzer, who was the only one that's doing what we consider paranormal research. I don't know if you're familiar now that his daughter is publicizing on the Holzer files some of his recordings. But back then, he was the only one that was publishing books about what was happening. And he was, of course, the only thing he was doing equipment-wise was a recording, and he was bringing in a psychic or a medium. And that was the extent of it, which was very interesting. And most of it was concentrated up in the Northeast. And I was, I grew up with that, and I just retained the interest. And like I tell everybody, back in the 1990s, when I got into it, there was no such term as what you hear now as paranormal researcher or paranormal investigator, ghost hunter. That didn't exist. And of course, there wasn't anything like now that you could go to find a group that could come and like bail you out. So basically, it was like one of like the referral system. Hey, a friend of a friend comes over, and of course, one of the things that made you, if you want to use the word successful, is that you kept your mouth shut. Because by the time these people reached out to you, they were pulling their hair out. And I'll tell you this: back then, by the time they reached out to somebody, they really were experiencing sometimes really horrific supernatural activity. Not like nowadays. Like I tell people feel a cold draft or, and everybody runs out of the house because they immediately assume that it's haunting. Right. They never bothered to investigate. Back then, by the time they got to you, a lot of times clergy has kind of poo-pooed them, even other family members, or they were desperate. They didn't know where to go to, in other words, to explain what was happening. And like I said, the privacy that you went in there and you tried to help them the best you could. And I want to say that that's where I learned. And like, again, this was not like now that you have a group. So even from back then, I always stayed a freelance investigator. Right. And then into the 2000s, there was a research foundation that worked for the state of, throughout the state of Florida. And I joined them. And if they needed help down in South Florida or warm body a little bit further north, I would travel. And then, and again, it's like everything else. People that stay in the same field for years, after a while, you network and you know who's who, because as time goes by, people will drop off. So after a while, and which is what I'm doing now. I don't do that many investigations, but I do a lot of consulting behind the scenes, because I do get a lot of calls from, team leaders, people, things of that nature. That's how it worked out. And then, of course, another thing is, everybody has seen a lot of these shows that they have all these gadgets, the FLIR camera, the camera this, the camera that. When I started, it was much simpler.
Yeah.
You had to pay to develop your film, by the way. I tell everybody there was such a thing.
I was going to say the technology they have now is just wild.
And I'm going to be perfectly honest with you. I sometimes think that this technology distracts from actually
I was
investigating.
going to say, how accurate do you think some of these detectors are?
You know what? Personally, I think a lot of the times these things are used to capture proof.
Yeah, right.
You know, and I think in my experience, the best evidence or proof, if you want to call it firsthand, is by observation. And observation means you stay still and look and listen, you know, like, and that sometimes is very hard to do. Because you know what, you put up a camera and that camera does not capture all angles.
Right.
Okay. There's a running joke amongst paranormal researchers that you get proof of the paranormal before you unpack your stuff and after you packed it away. It's just like, you know, like they're almost,
I was going to
watching.
say if more like they're conscious or aware.
Exactly. You know, if we're not
I've
talking
heard
residual
that too.
haunting or something like that, it's laughable because it's like, you know, all this time that you're running around with all these things and gadgets and, you know, taking
was gonna
base
say,
temperature readings. It's
one location that I've always been interested is Skinwalker Ranch.
Mhm.
And then, you know, now that, I mean, I think Robert Bigelow found out a lot of things, but then, you know, the new owners, they had made the show, The Secrets of Skinwalker Ranch. And it does seem like every time they try to do something like, and I don't know if that's for the show or whatnot, but it always seems to
Well, let me
screw
tell
up
you
their
something.
technology.
Considering, and I mean, I know that they got to like tailor their whatever they show to fit into the 30 or 1 hour of the show.
Right.
It looks like they're really trying to do objective scientific verification of what the anomalies are.
I was going to say that Travis seems like he's pretty thorough.
Yeah. He's like, I just want to find.
Right.
I want to figure this out, and I think especially Travis, the astrophysicist.
Yeah. Right.
I think he came there at the beginning, very kind of like, you know, I don't think he was. He was thinking, I'm going to find something
to poke holes
natural, and this is, you know, and I think after a while he realized that there was a lot of stuff going on there. Let me tell you something, from the sightings, even from the school teacher that lived in that area, that was, you know, meeting up with people and taking their basically a report of what their sightings were.
Right.
From that into where the other family moved in, the ones that, you know, immediately they started having paranormal experiences.
Yeah, I think that was the one that it saw like that big wolf creature or whatever.
Let me tell you something. And that thing that it attacked them, it's like, because, you know, you always think of, how can I say it, all this phenomena, whether it's paranormal, UFO, whatever you want to call it, interdimensional, as like they don't want to be seen. It's always like they do it when nobody's watching.
Well, I was going to say that story was weird because at first if I remember correctly, it didn't do anything to them and it ripped a calf through the fence.
Right.
And that was when he shot it. And then like they were chasing it through, and then it kind of vanished into a portal or whatever. From the story, they didn't know either. It just kind of was gone.
Right. Well, it almost sounds like normally most wild animals are very wary of humans.
Right.
You see, and it almost sounds like this animal, let's call it an animal because that's what
I was going to say.
Had no fear of, hey, I'm going to eat your calf right in front of you, and if you don't like it, too bad.
Yeah, well, it almost seemed like it was trying to scare him off the property, or, you know, like they wouldn't look at it as property but get away from this area. And then, you know, the natives at the time had said that was what that was for, was to push people away from that area, like a curse or whatnot.
Well, you know what?
But I don't know.
And I'm going to tell you, and this is the thing that sometimes, you know, when you look at some of the phenomena that's there, whether it's like when their equipment goes haywire,
right?
You know, you could kind of say, okay, that's part of the environment, or if they're finding something, and I'm going to use a kind of a loaded word here, but it doesn't seem malevolent. You understand what I'm saying?
Right.
It's just something that, whether it's in the ground or in the atmosphere, or even if it's origins,
and that was what I
think
that's what I found interesting, is that they all connect, like
right,
every
but
level.
Then when you start talking about some of the things that have happened to people and the animals, it puts almost like a scary slant, like in other words, that they're not really friendly towards humans. How's that?
Yeah.
The other phenomena, you get crazy readings. Okay, that. But this other part is the one that almost makes you think, we might be on the short end of the stick with whatever's there.
So
as
do
far
you
as being human.
believe that it's a displaced soul, a negative energy?
Well,
What do
you
you,
know
what do you
what?
what do you personally believe that the cause of these things are?
A lot of people, at one point you always thought of UFOs or extraterrestrials visiting us as in traveling through light years, like they have these great, like in Star Wars, let's go light speed.
Right.
Yeah.
But then, now you hear about intra or interdimensional travels. Okay. Or they're coming in through some type of portal. In other words, that this is how they're able to get around, maybe
I
from
was
whatever
thinking,
distance they're coming from.
yeah, I was going to
And
say the
then,
further we get, it seems that way.
right, is that a possibility? Or if you talk to some people who research, there's that same thing where you see UFO sightings dovetailing with sightings of cryptids.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Where people that track this, that they say, okay, they start seeing if there's a spike in UFO sighting, all of a sudden we see an uptick of
Right.
whether it's Bigfoot or any other cryptid sightings.
Mothman or, yeah.
Right. From totally separate.
Yeah.
And of course, in that same general area, whether it's a couple of
Yeah.
100 miles, but that's one of the things that I've spoken to different people that say, there seems to be some type of correlation. And
That's what I
maybe
was
once
wondering.
you could say, well, maybe it's a coincidence. But then it begs the question, are these cryptids coming in through a rip, like sneaking through,
Yeah.
or are they being brought in back and forth by these extraterrestrials? In other words, that they're the ones that are that have control over them, and of course can explain why some cryptids, they disappear.
Right.
They're being sought and they disappear. No skeletons. I'm going to give prime example, a Bigfoot. A lot of people will say absolutely not. Bigfoot is a natural lost primate, whatever you want to call it, that we just haven't found because of the wilderness where it exists in.
Right.
And for all we know, they might even bury or put their dead away in a cave, which is maybe why we never find remains. But then there's others that say, well, what if because they're maybe how can I say, a species that was genetically tweaked by extraterrestrials, one of the many that supposedly are visiting us? I mean, there's so many questions, so many rabbit holes you could go down on that one.
Yeah, I
The
was going to say,
skinwalkers are very weird and very interesting, but kind of scary because of what's been going on there.
yeah, I was going to say there's a lot that connects from different realms there, and that's where I was kind of going with that, is that maybe there is a connection on like a rift in time or a portal being open, that you bring more things in than just UFO travelers.
Well, there's a lot of specific places on Earth that are hotspots, if you will, for that type of that type of nature that you'd have, where, like you said, it'd be a rift or a portal or a lot of specific targeted areas for whatever reason it is. Like the energy is more directed into these areas, or how maybe it's more balanced in that areas, and that's why they're able to cross into a different plane.
Absolutely.
Well, the natives that originally, that they said that they kind of stayed away from that place because it was supposed to be used by skinwalkers, as in humans that can assume the shape of an animal, right? Whether they did so only, by wearing pelts or maybe they were shapeshifters. Let's go there. Okay. The natives in that area knew to stay, like, that's the place you don't go. Right. It wasn't only that they saw strange lights and all the things that they see now spiritually, because of what you asked before, Jake, over here on the right, my right. And some spiritual or metaphysical level, they knew, don't go there.
Yeah.
So, that there's spiritual turbulence there. Absolutely. Yes, I do think that. So
I take it that over your experience through a lot of different things, obviously, are you more sensitive to like feeling the energy in these places of paranormal than most?
Yes.
And
I'll tell you what, most people think that you're, that story, you're born psychic, of course there's psychics and there's mediums. Mediums are the ones that can channel the dead. And a lot of people think channeling strictly as in, channeling means that you could actually, if you let them, they can take your body over and your vocal cords. All right. Okay. If you look at some of the Hans Holzer investigations, when he would take a psychic or medium there, the spirit that was supposedly there took over the vocal cords of the medium and spoke and would tell the story. And then there's psychics which get the impressions, or sometimes they see like a movie played out. But yeah, to your question, after a while, you can't help it. Your body becomes an instrument.
Yeah.
You know when it's like nothing, there's like nothing, or that's residual, or I've gone to places. All I have to do is, like I tell people, I've pulled up, and they zoom up to the curb to meet you. You know, like a dog comes up to you and wants to sniff you and check you out, and
so saying that they can feel
you know, and you
they can feel that
it's
you're
like
aware.
a rush of energy that I'm not in air conditioning, I'm not, and it just, you feel it, and you develop that like a muscle, and you learn to trust it after a while. And a lot of times, I hate to say it, it's more accurate than some equipment.
Yeah.
Well, that's what we were talking about with the equipment conversation. I think that like as you said, the equipment pretty much is just to validate the feelings of that what you've already gone through walking in, just so you can show someone else, because you know the feeling that you're feeling, but how can you express that without saying this machine also, essentially validates exactly what I'm telling you.
I was going to say, and then over time, I'm sure that the energies that are at hand probably feel that, like you said, they come and meet you because they can feel that you know that they're there, or realize.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's and it doesn't happen all the times. And like I say, you will have some I'm going to say a good portion of discarnate, intelligent hauntings. I'm not talking your residual stuff. Sometimes they don't want it. They go up into the attic, well, here in Florida, they don't have basements that much, but into crawl spaces. They don't want to. They hope that you go away. Sometimes they don't want to interact with you. Others, you'll get every once in a while the belligerent type, which is, this is their territory, and then they, those are the ones that you see more often. Right. And then sometimes you do every once in a while encounter the non-human. I'm going to use the less explosive word than demon, because that one is overused, but non-human, which, by the way, and as an aside real quick, in some type of what they call spiritual attachments, there are stories, and I have worked on it when I was a hypnotist, where people have had attachments from non-human as in aliens in their aura. Okay. That they can, how you hear about people getting implants, under their skin. Yep. Well, that what they do is basically they go into the aura of your body to monitor you, basically just to see, like that movie, Avatar, where basically you go in there and you can experience. Well, what they're trying to do is up close and personal monitoring and experiencing what it's like. But basically it's an intrusion, though, whichever way you look at it. But that's an aside from the, as far as, like you said, where you develop, yes, you develop it. You learn to trust it, despite what equipment is saying yes or no, you're right, you're wrong.
So what you're saying is, even that little implant might not just be like a tracker, but more like a biological connection to that person.
Like see through your eyes sort of thing.
Yeah.
Right. They have they can go into, that we all have like an aura, which, they basically, they confirmed it with that Kirlian photography, where you have like an outline of energy.
Yeah. Energy field.
All living things have it.
Right.
And they have a way of basically, I guess through their technology or God knows what, basically, if you want to call it like a parasite.
Yeah.
And they're monitoring you on all levels. It's not just physiology. It's your mental, it's everything.
It's interesting.
It's almost like a voyeurist, but real.
Well, I mean, the thing is, like, some people listen to this and they would say, well, that's just crazy. But I don't even know how many, at least over hundreds of cases where they pull these little trackers or little pieces of what they can't explain out of people. So it does happen. What that actually used for is interesting to even kind of imagine or think.
A lot of hypnotists have come across them where basically who they end up talking to is an extraterrestrial. And I know that sounds way out there, but they didn't expect it. And that's how I've read of case studies where they ran across that. So
How do you feel about a little bit sideways, but back still going into like this different embodiment? How do you feel about exorcisms? Do you feel that that is something non-human as well?
No.
Or how do you? What do you?
Okay. Okay. Exorcism is a very loaded word. Okay, because
Right.
we all think of The Exorcist.
Right.
That movie ruined it.
I'm not. Yeah, I don't mean to have a specific name for the being.
No. What I'm saying is,
right.
Exorcism is a real loaded word.
Right.
Let me explain. When I did hypnotherapy, I did alternative forms of hypnotherapy, and one of them was called working with spiritual attachments.
Right. That's what made me walk into
in a
this
religious
question.
sense, you would call that an exorcism, right? Right, the attachment. Now you have to understand an attachment in your aura. Okay, there's four levels of for a person to be possessed. Okay, there's influence, there's oppression, there's obsession, and there's possession. Okay, possession is very rare, and somebody could be possessed and bounce back between possession and obsession. And when the person goes into full possession, that's when they say, "I can't remember what I did."
Right.
Or they do things, and when they come out of it, they don't. And people think, wow, sure, likely story. So they could be most of the time obsessed, and then they'll fall into possession. But that's not that easy. And basically it's like layers. All right. Influence is when, and let me explain, you could get that from a regular dead person, by the way. It doesn't have to be a non-human entity. It doesn't have to be a demon.
Right.
It could be a discarnate that sometimes even from family members, believe it or not. Okay, there's a thing in the metaphysical world that like attracts like. If you're an angry person, okay, and your aura is thinned out, which could happen for various reasons, you probably are vibrating and putting out that angry feel, and you're going to attract discarnates. Okay, these are spirits of people that are not bound to a certain place. Like basically, hey, it's like, you're my kind of guy, or you're my kind of girl. Same thing, right. Sadness, so suicidal ideations, things of that nature, addictions. Basically, that's what you pull in. All right, those are the regular dead people. And then you start going into attachments of what they call non-humans, whether you want to call them demonic, or in maybe even alien or extraterrestrial origins. And as far as non-human, they have different hierarchies. They have dumb, stupid ones that are very easy to get rid of, all the way up to very malevolent ones. They usually, for somebody that's not religious, something like that, it's like you need to pull in the big guns, as in religious. I mean, because that needs a team of people to work on that type of possession and or exorcism. And which, by the way, contrary to what you see in the movie, sometimes that's not like a one-shot deal.
I was going to say, there was a huge spike at the time of that movie, that there was a lot of exorcisms going on.
Yes.
And then I seen it like recently, I was listening to somebody talk about that now, like the Catholic Church does them virtually online. I'm like, is that even possible?
Well, there was back in 2016, the major exorcist for many, many years for the Catholic Church was Father Amaranth. He passed away. I was reading an article where they were trying to, for brand new priests coming out of the seminary, they were tapping them like, hey, we want you to bring you in as an exorcist so that you could get that special training. And guess what? None of them wanted to do it.
Yeah,
because, believe it or not, when you speak to any of these priests that have been involved in exorcisms, whether it's very psychologically damaging sometimes for them.
Absolutely.
Sure.
Okay. It's not like, hey, it's, in other words, even though you're participating in it and you have enough faith in your religion, let's say we're talking here Catholicism, you understand that there's a danger to your life and to your sanity and to your well-being. Right. And it's almost like you are earmarked as well within that realm, especially by the higher hierarchies of very evil beings, whatever their origin. Okay. And a lot of people say, well, is that like a religious slant? And I say, no, not really. Because, you do have different religions that address this. It's not just the Judeo-Christian. All religions have something that's the equivalent of an exorcism. So Yeah, and I have done stuff on my own with spiritual attachments of dead people, of regular dead people, what I call. And then I've also done it with a low-level non-human entity. And there's a dialogue. And in other words, this is somebody that would need to be trained to know what they're doing and what to say. And then there's certain instances where you have to be smart enough to say, I got to pull away from this and I need to get help. I can't go forward.
Do you absorb any of that yourself by being a part? You talked about the mental part, but even a part of your aura, do you run the risk of them attaching to you thus?
You would never. That's one of the things that, you would always be asked for protection at all times before doing this. And you have to really be aware, not only of your spiritual protection, but how you feel. I'm going to give you, for instance, I would tell people, and I've spoken to people that want to become ghost hunters, or when we had people, don't go on a case if you're tired, if you're coming down with a cold, because believe it or not, all these things, you become the target. Okay, even physical, if you're super stressed out, or you've got a lot of stuff going on, or it's something's just going on, those are the times when you pull back from this type of work.
That makes sense.
And sit it out, because you become the weak link, and either you're going to basically be a liability to your team and of course yourself. And then you hear those stories about investigators that then they get attachment and weird stuff starts to happen to them at home.
Right.
Yeah.
A lot of times that's the origin. They don't take a time down. And of course, and if that's just regular old ghost hunting, can you imagine somebody that's involved in an exorcism?
Yeah.
Where, whether they see a person levitate, or whether, because a lot of people will say, well, is this person that's supposedly possessed, they're making this all up. They're just, people heard, that sometimes when people are insane, they have superhuman strength. But when you read a lot of the information on people that have participated in exorcisms, whether not only priests, but lay people like psychiatrists and stuff, they will tell you that these people will say and know things about them that there is no way that person that's possessed would know. Right. It's just they know that this person, to have this intimate knowledge of something about me, this is not somebody faking, like, going around and going, So in other words, you're going up against something
that makes sense, though. If your energies were low on any sort,
of course
you'd just be vulnerable.
Of course. And a lot of people, there's no, there's no shame in live to fight another day. That's right. A lot of times, whether it's from ghost hunting to something as extreme as, possession, if you want to call it an exorcism, you have to learn what your strengths are and when you're weak. And, but yeah, a lot of people, I've spoken to, especially in the first part, that I would talk to people who would tell me, hey, I went to my clergy, to my church. And by the way, I don't mean Catholic. This was different denominations across the board. And I tried to talk to my spiritual, and some of them, they were regular churchgoers. Others were, but anyway, they would end up trying to look, and they were kind of, I don't want to say dismissed, but they were kind of like told, well, could it be this? And they say, look, I don't think they believed me. I said, no, they believed you. No, I don't think they believed. I go, they believed you. I said, they believed you. You know what? But they're afraid to tell you that they're afraid to go and confront.
Right.
Just in case it sounds that
they
you're
just
saying
don't know what
you're
to
describing.
do with the thing there.
Yeah.
You did the right thing. You think you have a spiritual problem because you kind of ruled out everything else. And you're coming to them, but what are they going to do? Hey, I have faith, but not enough to go in there, maybe confront whatever's there. So they kind of poo-poo you a little bit, and, and here's a little bit of holy water of that. But, have you checked? And they believe you. I'm absolutely positive they believe you, because a lot of these, and by the way, this doesn't mean that they're not good, whatever they are, priests, pastors, whatever. If you go to them with a problem, like my kid's acting up, my marriage is in trouble, or I need this, they're great. But you walk in there and you tell them, look, this is going on, everything changes.
Right. I need you to go fight an interdimensional battle within my body. against some,
It's
yeah,
like,
against a
yeah,
potential
it's like,
demonic spirit, Pastor. Yeah, you might, they might balk
you
at you a
will, let
little
me
bit.
tell you, then you will. So a lot of people, when you said that thing about, the exorcisms and that they have an uptick and that they're doing it online, I kind of see why.
I was just wondering
So
if
they're
in a
just not in
way,
direct connection to it.
well, I
Like,
was just wondering, is it possible if you're not in the room to really address that energy with, like, because you're kind of directing your
you know
energy.
what? The last thing I had heard, excuse me, because this thing is that they weren't doing the exorcisms per se online, but they were bringing in priests and lay people to pray online
Okay.
at the same time. And in other words, if they couldn't get a group of people, they were bringing people in online to pray, looking at the exorcism and praying.
I suppose it doesn't really matter where you're at
heard.
if you're focused your energy where it's supposed to be, I guess.
Right.
I guess it.
And that they are putting in this energy of protection and prayer and this and
I guess
that.
you kind of look at
I
it as
heard.
the theatrical in the movies, is that like if it was a real exorcism, you think you'd have to be there to like direct everything you have to try to pull this out of somebody.
Okay, this is the thing about exorcisms. And if you look at any of them, sometimes this person becomes agitated. They become agitated. Whoever is, in other words, to be able to command whatever is there, you need that person to be in person. Right. Okay. And sometimes they even need helpers to hold them down, because this person sometimes, that's my little dog that they're bugging her. I'm sorry.
That's all right.
That they feel like, hey, the people become wild. They try to attack maybe the priest or that's the part that now, as far as online, maybe they're trying. I want to tell you something. If somebody maybe has, okay, this is the way it works. Influence is this. Influence is when you've got a spirit around you. And by this, I'm not saying demon. It could be just a plain old dead person who hangs out with you. And then, you start getting these ideas and you're like, man, where did that come from? Oh, that's weird. Or you say something that you're like, what? But they're really, they haven't really enmeshed into your aura. They haven't enmeshed into your aura. Okay. They try to look for a weak point. Let me explain. A weak point on your aura can come about physical trauma, emotional trauma, being anesthetized. That's why you got to be real careful when you go into the hospital. Real high stress levels. By this, I don't mean regular stress. Right. I mean like full bore stress to the max for days. Sometimes we'll peak out of stress and then we come down and you're okay. It's prolonged systematic stress that will weaken your aura. Okay. Let's not even go if you partake of substances in extreme quantities, whether they're prescription, alcohol, anything. All extremes are bad. Right. They thin out. And basically think of it as that they put holes in your aura. So whatever it is trying to get into, if you have a strong aura, yeah, you might get somebody that influences you, and then after a while they get lost because no luck here. But if you're vibrating and you've got all these things going on, then they start wiggling in, and then they come to the point where they're enmeshed in your aura. Even if they wanted to leave, they couldn't. And basically, sometimes some people will even display the physical symptoms. And let me give you, for instance, I've had people that have had an attachment from a family member, an older family member. Okay. And after a while, they'll start, let's say, I want to say Uncle Jim used to have a bad hip, and all of a sudden, this person that we've never had a hip problem is having a hip problem or behaving and saying certain things. There was one time that somebody told me that they had a little boy in the family, and the grandfather had passed away. Shh, come here, you guys. I'm sorry. Somebody was saying, oh, he would say like little phrases. Oh, he sounds just like grandpa. Yeah. And the reason for that is grandpa didn't mean to attach to him. Grandpa was trying to protect him and became enmeshed in his aura. Okay. Yeah. In other words, grandpa, instead of going on into the great beyond, the pearly gates, whatever you want to call it, basically became trying maybe to protect or maybe close to the grandchild, became enmeshed in their aura. That's the most benign.
I don't know if this kind of relates or not, but do you think that might also come into like Edgar Casey and Nikola Tesla when they said like information was just given to them? You think that might have been good sides of just other people's information being displaced into your thought, or in the same kind of sense?
Well,
Because they're interesting individuals, and when you said that, that's where I went, was like, even Edgar
you could
Casey
think
had said
of,
things like that.
do you mean like in the sense of ESP, like
Well,
extrasensory perception?
in one of his quotes, he had said that he was given information by something, but he called it
Okay.
universal knowledge, but it was more like
Right.
implants of thought that weren't his. Just like when you said you
Okay.
say something and you're kind of like, where'd that come from? Well, and that's kind of where I went, because I was just reading something about him, and some of his quotes kind of reminded me of that situation.
Well, you do get people who say Akashic records, that they have, that when they go into trance, they'll access Akashic records.
Right.
They say that all human consciousness is basically in a place that you could access it.
Right.
I'm sure you've heard of people, either whether they're artists, they say what they call the muse. This is what inspired them.
Right.
Sometimes they personify it, make it look like a person. And you will speak to a lot of people that create music, write, and they'll say, man, when I came up with that, I was like in a trance.
Right.
I was like in a
I've been there.
place, a zone, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
That it comes and goes.
Yeah.
And now, do you want to say, are they able to access someplace, or is it something working the other direction?
Right. That's what
giving you the information, or that's the part we don't know. Like, well, Edgar Casey, he was the dreaming prophet. This would happen to him when he was basically in a state of, you want to call it trance?
Right.
Yep. Well, and then I was going to say, there was another inventor that did the same thing. He would sit back in a recliner and hold pool balls until when he heard them hit the ground, then he would get out a pen and paper and start writing things down, because he knew he was right on that cusp of another dimension, or just the dream world, or whatever you want to call it. So
right. And there's people that even do paintings, and they'll say that they're channeling like another painter. There's people that have written books, and supposedly they are being used in a way of by a deceased person. And then other people will tell you, creators will tell you, hey, some of my best work, it was if I try to recapture it, it was just this connection that I had at that moment.
Yeah.
Where everything came into my head.
Yeah, and you're talking about the highly artistic and the highly some of the highest educated people, and some of the people they're just in tune on a different wavelength. Like you're not talking about your average Joe that's catching these, or do you think that they would dismiss them, or like you said, it's a muscle that needs to be worked, correct? Like if you don't work it, then it'll just will you lose your ability?
If you don't pay attention to it. I'm going to tell you something. And one time the best idea, believe it or not, is when you empty out your head. Like when you're taking a shower, that you're kind of like, that you zone out, you veg out, whatever you want to call it. Basically, you leave room for the idea to come in.
Yeah.
Same thing. And that's happened to me, where sometimes either it's not even a problem, something I'm trying to figure out. And then all of a sudden I'll wake up in the morning, I'll go, oh my God, that's it.
Right.
I got to do that, or I forgot,
It just happened to me recently.
Your brain kind of like, whoosh.
Like when you stop looking for something.
Multitasking.
Right. You're searching for your keys. So when you're looking for your keys, you stop looking for your keys, because your brain is racing, running through every single thing that they could possibly be, where you could just stop for a minute, and then they'll slowly be able to move into your head of where they actually may be, like the actual inner, the actual thought, rather than clouding your own thoughts with, BS basically.
You know what? You want me to tell you what the antidote is when you've lost something, and you'll find it right away?
Sure.
All you have to do is, I see it. Say out loud, I see it. I see it. I see it. I guarantee you, if it's there to be seen, your subconscious mind knows exactly where it's at. You know how sometimes you'll see something that's right there, and you know where it's at, and then you'll look at it, I can't believe I didn't see it.
So you definitely
all
believe
you
in
have to say is, I see it. I see it. I see it. And this happens. I see it, and you either see it, or all of a sudden you'll walk into the room where it's at, because your subconscious mind holds everything.
Right.
Your
subconscious knows where you set it down.
Oh, absolutely. It knows.
It just can't pull up that file as fast as you want.
So you definitely believe in the manifestation of thought. If you say it out loud and you want something certain.
Basically, you're directing your brain. your
Yeah.
brain. Like you
Right.
said, you stop a minute, you say, I see it. And you look around, I see it. I do this all the time because like I'm multitasking and I'll put something down and then, well,
Oh,
I'm trying
yeah.
to do something else. And then it's like, oh, what
Do it
did
all
I
the
do
time.
that? And I have found stuff and sure enough, I find it. And all I have to do is start saying to myself, I see it. And then I see it. It's almost like you're
Yeah,
telling
that-
yourself, you see
That
it.
Right.
subconscious is something else, I tell you. Because I
That
mean,
is
even
definitely going to be used
in the dream world, you like hear this full song and you're like, I don't even know the lyrics of that song. But in the dream, you know every note, every
Mhm.
lyric, everything. It's weird.
Well, the subconscious mind is very, very tricky. It's very powerful. And I'm going to tell you, a lot of people don't realize that your mind, it's 89% subconscious and 11% conscious. If you think that what's in the driver's seat is your conscious mind, no, it's not. It's
Yeah,
your
I
subconscious
believe
mind.
for sure.
That is what
Definitely believe that.
basically is running the show. And I became very familiar with it because I would have people come to me, you know, the regular things, stop smoking, you know, whatever, basically behavior modification.
Right.
And they couldn't understand. Logically, they're making all these plans, whatever. And I would tell them, your mind is very simple. It works on a pain or pleasure principle. Pleasure is what's known, your everyday, your routine. To the mind, pain is the unknown. What will happen? And I'm going to give you, for instance, that thing about losing weight. Let's go with that one. You as logically as you could say, I'm miserable, I need to lose weight, you know, I want to look better, whatever. And you go to the gym and you make all these plans. Your subconscious mind in the background is saying, if you lose weight, then what do? You might become attractive. And what about all those clothes you got there? You know, you might have to get rid of those clothes. And then what if you get attention? And what it'll do to your existing relationship? You know, your subconscious mind extrapolates all these negatives, outcomes of you, let's say, losing weight. And that's the way it works. And it goes behind the scenes. You know, everybody's different depending on what's going on in their life and in their mind.
Right.
And this is why basically you get sidelined by you, because your subconscious mind wants you to be what you know. This is my life. This is my body. This is what I know. It's not the best, but I know what it is. Same thing when people want to switch jobs. You know, we're very, very resistant. And the one that always does us in is your subconscious mind, unless you work with it. And it's very, very powerful, very powerful. People underestimate it when they're trying to do some type of change, or even if it's an improvement.
I was going to say, even like illnesses and things of that nature.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yes.
one of my one of my favorite quotes is by John Covey, and he says, most people will do more to avoid pain than to gain pleasure. It's literally like, it's exactly what it is, like exactly what you're saying. Like their subconscious is going to flood their brain with thoughts of pain rather than the potential of pleasure.
Yes. You'd rather it's what I know. At least it's what I know. I might not be happy, but it's what I know. And people will just and then, you know, of course, when they're really old and they realize, man, what a waste of time that was. It's too late. You know, I should have done it. I shouldn't have been scared. Who cares what, you know, whatever. I should have just done what I call the E word, which is execute. Stop the planning. There comes a point. You got to
say at one point is you fail when you don't try, you know, something of a goal or a thought or whatever else, and you're scared of the failure. You've already failed when you don't try at all. So
of course. And a lot of people, they'll get caught up in the planning, but that's all they do.
Yeah,
man, they've researched it to the nth degree.
Plan it to the ground.
Partly guilty of that too.
Never pull the trigger on it.
I always pull the trigger, but
there's nothing wrong with it. Don't get me wrong. It's just as bad to be so impulsive that then. But there comes a point where, you know, if you're going to get a guarantee, you know, if somebody came up to you and go, I guarantee that what you're going to do, it's not going to be a failure. You'd be like, let's go.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Well, that's part of
it. There comes a point where you got to like, and do a little bit of the what's the worst case scenario, okay, and then forgive yourself and keep going.
Yeah, I was gonna say you end up back to where when you didn't try it at all. So
yeah, exactly. But a lot of people avoid that like the plague.
Oh, absolutely. Well, let's go back to switching back to the gears of the paranormal part of it. Me personally, I'm guessing that our fans would want to know the same thing. What incident or event is your most significant, one that stands out in your head that you've came across, something paranormal that had really like maybe changed what you think about it in general?
Well, let me see. there was, I don't know if you've heard, God, I'll tell you what, this is a story. This is something that happened to me when I was a teenager, and I didn't know what it was while it was happening.
Okay.
It's later on,
Right.
when I really got into that I realized that I basically had a paranormal encounter. Okay. Because to be honest with you, I've had so many things, weird stuff happen to me that it's
I was going to say, we could spend all day. Obviously, you wrote books on it, which we'll put
it's like,
all that in the show notes.
I've had a lot of weird stuff. But when I was like 16, I remember my mom, we used to live across the street from my grandmother. And we used to live, one of those houses that's got a crawl space underneath. So the floor is wooden. So when you walk on it, and we had rented it. I grew up in that neighborhood, and we rented it from a lady. Her husband died, and she rented it out, and whatever. But, so my mom would leave to go to work. I was in high school, and she would tell me, if you ever decide to stay home, you need to call your grandmother and tell her that you're at the house. Okay. So one morning, I had gone into my mom's house, in my mom's bedroom, which was at the end of the hall, in the back of the house. Kitchen's in the front. And I'm kind of waking up, and what wakes me up is I hear somebody going through the drawers and the cupboards in the kitchen. Okay. When somebody's opening and,
right.
The only other person who had a key to that house was my grandmother. So I'm thinking in that moment, but later on I realized that was stupid. My grandmother would never have gone over there. She had real bad legs. Plus we didn't have anything she wouldn't have had. But in that moment, I was fully awake, by the way. I thought my grandmother is in the kitchen looking for something. God knows what. That's weird. Okay. So I hear this. And then I hear somebody walking down the hallway. Because, even though it was carpet in the hallway, you could still hear the
Yeah.
So I turn over and I just because I'm thinking my grandmother is going to grill me why I didn't go to school. Because the truth was, I just didn't feel like going to school. But I knew she was going to give me grief about it. So I kind of turned over and I put the blanket, I kind of turned away. And it's really funny because I felt that somebody came to the doorway of the room. By the way, my grandmother was a real short lady. And it's difficult to explain, but I felt that whoever was looking at me from the bedroom was tall.
Towering over you.
Yeah.
Well, it's, like when somebody stops in the doorway. And my grandmother, if it would have been my grandmother, I know her, she would have come into the room and go, "What are you doing here?"
Yeah.
Whoever came to the doorway, it's a weird, because basically my back was turned to the doorway. I felt like it was a taller vantage point. Whoever it is comes up and pulled a blanket up over my shoulder. Okay.
Yikes.
Turns around and leaves. Okay. I stay at home. I goof off. My mom gets home from work, and usually what she would do is right after she'd go over to see my grandmother and whatever. 5 minutes later, the phone ring. I answer. My mom, "Why didn't you tell your grandmother that you stayed home and you didn't go to school?" I said, "But she knows it. She came into the house." And you hear my mom telling her, she's saying that, and you hear my grandma, "I didn't go over there. What's she talking about?" My grandmother swore up and down and sideways that she didn't go into the house. And by the way, she had no need to lie. You see what I'm saying?
Right. She had no incentive.
She would have just said, "Yeah, I was there." And it was like, and she's like, that happened. And about 4 days later, she calls us at 3 a.m. And that just so happened was one of those nights I was sleeping with my mom because, I was a real wimp, so I was sleeping with my mom instead of my room. My mom picks up the phone like, "What is it?" Here's my grandmother telling her, "Is Marlene next to you? Is Marlene in the house?" She's like, "She's right next to me." "Are you sure?" She's like, "She's right next to me." She goes, because I would go over and I would always knock on the door a certain way and I would call her name out. She goes, "Somebody just came to the door and knocked like she does and called my name."
Yeah.
And that was 3 or 4 days. And that was really weird. And prior to that, which I didn't, I had, this was around this was right before the summer, before we got into the school. I had a guy that, when you're talking on the phone, and by the way, this is the time when it was a corded phone.
Yeah.
So I would stretch this long cord and sit in the hallway talking to 1 a.m. to this guy that I liked. And he was a bus boy. So that's the only time he could get off work. Well, a couple of times we had the windows open because they had those jealousy windows. And I would the first couple of times I heard the chain link gate rattle. And I thought, "Oh, it's a cat." We didn't have cats, by the way, or animals. that's a cat. But then I heard steps. A couple of times it happened that I heard like somebody walking in the grass. And by the way, it's 1 a.m. It's really quiet. There's no noise.
Right.
So much so that I told this guy, there's somebody in my yard. He's like, stand in front. I'm like, are you kidding? So I jump into the bed with my mom and I'm like, there's somebody in the yard. There's somebody in the yard. She's like, what? So here we are going from window to window. By the way, there's no trees, nothing. That happened to me twice. And the second time I was in my room with a desk and I had the window here and it, you looked out in the backyard. The same thing. I'm here writing and I've got one of those little desk lamps. I hear somebody stepping up, like walking rapidly up to that window where I was. And I was like, if I look up, I'm going to see whoever or whatever.
Yeah.
I flipped my chair back. And again, I run to my poor mother. She's asleep. There's somebody in the yard. And she's like, oh my God. And now when I look back at it, my point being, I think that whoever that was whoever I kept hearing.
Yeah.
Either, jiggling the chain link fence or walking the steps. Was that you could tell this was not an animal.
Well, I was going to say, had your grandpa passed away?
I was going to say that was before you.
No, my grandparents were across the street.
Though. Okay,
but that was before you understood your abilities.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, you know what?
So
All my grandparents were alive at that time.
Okay.
All my grandparents were alive. Well, no, my older grandfather, no, one of my grandfathers, but it was like the only thing I could think of, and this of course is later on, is that the couple that lived there, that they had brought up their daughter, like I said, she was renting out the house because her husband had passed away. That's the only person I could think of. But like you said, when things happen that you don't get scared because you really don't understand what you're experiencing.
Right.
And later on, you kind of put 2 and 2 together and you realize that was almost like when you're not looking for it. Because, a lot of people nowadays, they're running around trying to have that moment.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And I want to say that was one of my early experiences.
They recognized your energy and they were
whatever it was. But let me tell you something. It was very unusual because when how you hear people say, I knew somebody was looking at me or I felt like I'm being watched. I understand it perfectly what that means. When you feel eyes or somebody watching you.
Yeah.
Or that you get the impression, like I said, my grandmother was a short lady, but I felt that whoever it was much taller and was looking at me from the doorway. It's a weird kind of situation. And later on, like I've had my own firsthand experiences with things that have happened to me where, again, you don't have a camera, you don't have a digital recorder, you don't have anything to provide proof per se. But once you have that firsthand experience that you see it, it's like, it doesn't matter because I know, unless you're delusional and you're trying to convince yourself, you basically, you rule out all the possibilities and you're left with, that was something that was supernatural.
Yep.
And sometimes you know what it is, exactly what the source is, and other times you don't.
I think that even the fact that you knew it was from a vantage point of something taller, I think that just shows that you have a little bit more intuition on that feeling because
right.
You
and
can
it's
feel
really funny because in that moment, you don't dissect it because part of your logical mind is thinking it's my grandmother.
Right.
And
you're just still more worried about getting caught for not going to school at that moment.
Yeah.
Let me tell you something. It's just, I knew. And the truth is, later on, I realized my grandmother, she wouldn't have, even though she had the key, I can't ever remember my grandmother going over to our house. We would always go over to hers. Right. Everybody would go over there.
Well, she would,
but like I said, when I woke up,
to lie.
I just, no, she wouldn't have.
Yeah.
I just assumed because she was the only one with the key that whoever was rustling around in the kitchen was her.
Yeah.
Which is why I didn't wake out, because if I really would have thought about it, I would have run, like, I don't know, bolted out. I don't know what I would lock the door. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's one of those things that, it's like ignorance is bliss.
Yeah.
Kind of thing.
Yeah,
so moment, they weird things happen and sometimes people don't recognize it for what it is.
So on some of your investigations, have you came across something pretty substantial to where it was like, there's no doubt there's something with us, as far as not like what, like you said, when somebody's filming and then it doesn't happen, all the devices are recording and nothing happens and then you shut it all off. And then there was like something really significant, anything like that maybe?
Okay. I'm going to tell you, and I've told this story before, and this happens to be like what like you said, when there's nothing, what we would do is when we were going to investigations, we would, after we finish, a lot of times people were coming in their own vehicles, but we wouldn't stand outside somebody's house, usually because it was kind of late. So we would say, hey, let's go to the gas station over there at the corner, the whatever, 7-Eleven, whatever. And we do like a very brief debriefing, 5-10 minutes. Hey, what did you find? Okay, I'm going to do this. We'll get together, just talk, park the cars, stand out there.
Right.
The smokers smoked their cigarette, whatever. And one time it was like 3 cars. I want to say it was 3 cars. And we had parked, the vehicles were turned off, and we're standing there talking about the case. And all of a sudden there's this lady, she had come by herself, and in her car, we hear something bumping around in the trunk of her car. Like something, like not like something shifted, like something bumped, like alive.
Around,
like
right.
So we all look at each other, we look at her, we're like, hey, so what did you do? Did you lock your cat in there? And she's like, she's wigging out. She's like, her eyes are like, no. Oh, and we're like, okay, you got to open the trunk of your car because we're not going to open it. So she's like, you could tell. And then again, we hear something like, bum, bum, bum. And it's like, it's your car, you're going to open it.
Yeah.
So she opens up the trunk, and we're like, I tell everybody, this is like, in the Aliens movie when the thing comes out the chest, that everybody's like, whoa, that's what we're expecting. What's going to come out of the trunk of the car? Nothing. There was nothing in there. She opens it, and we're like ready to like dive behind whatever. There was nothing in there. She just had regular stuff people have in the trunk of their cars. And whatever was moving around in there sounded basically like it was a live thing, not like something had shifted. And I tell everybody, this was around the time many years ago when the Beanie Babies were like a big deal. And this lady had a bunch of them. She used to have she goes around to the front of to the front seat. She comes back again with this face like, oh, what's wrong? She goes, the Beanie Babies I had on the dashboard, they're moved. Okay. And we're like, well, just call us and tell us you made it home. She was one of those people that came by themselves.
Yeah.
That happened one time. And by the way, I tell everybody, this is when I learned after that, I was more persistent that I would never leave an investigation until I smudged myself and my vehicle down.
Right.
Okay. Because that was another time, same thing, same scenario. We meet somewhere. And I remember this was like, it was one of those quick stop places, but it was empty. And the parking lot was totally empty. They only had the big trash can things where people, and we're just standing there and we're talking, and all of a sudden we hear people talking, like another group of people talking, but you really couldn't make out what they're saying. But when all of a sudden something intrudes on you, that everybody stops and looks around like, where's that coming from? There's a bunch of people, and we're like, everybody just stops, and then it just quieted down, and we're like, did you hear that? Yeah, I heard that. Did you hear that? Yeah. So we're like, okay, but nothing. We start talking. Like within about 30 seconds, we start hearing that murmuring of voices. And there's no way.
Like overlapping of voices that are
right,
beyond
like
the amount of people you have.
Talking. And it's like, this is not it was like a murmuring, but nothing that you could say, I can hear exactly what they're saying.
Right.
And we were like, and then of course, the next couple of times we were looking at each other like, keep talking, because we realized as soon as we stopped, it would stop. Okay, which was really very, very unusual. And right about after the 3rd time, it was like, we got to go home. Everybody's leaving. Bye. Okay, I'll talk to you later. Bye. It was time to go. So sometimes what I'm saying is, contrary to what a lot of people believe, there's a lot of free floating, what they call discarnates. These are spirits, okay, that are not tied to a place. And what happens is, when you do a paranormal investigation, by the way, most of your team eventually develops some type of sensitivity. Plus, basically, you're begging for it. So what you're doing is you're putting an all points bulletin to any discarnate. Come on in. You've got people that might be able to see or hear you or communicate with you.
Right. Go ahead and attach yourself and come on in. And
or a lot of them,
just to
believe
be
it or
in the
not,
area.
it's not even attachment.
Just
a lot
make
of them,
yourself
all they
known.
want is to communicate. One of two things. Either they don't understand they're dead and they want somebody to tell them what happened to me. Why doesn't anybody talk to me? Or it's really weird. Some of them are dead and they want that last moment of acknowledgement. Yeah. They want to be able to say, you know what, this happened, and you're like, whatever. And that's, believe it or not, it's that simple to release them. But they're kind of like stuck in
so you release them to the next realm.
Right. Either that or I'm going to give you, for instance, you all heard about the, the tunnel of light and all that. Well,
Right.
let's say you die and you don't realize you died. It was either a violent, traumatic, sudden death. You were anesthetized, you were in surgery, you were heavily medicated, or let's say you lost consciousness, they take you to the hospital, you expire. The last thing you remember, though, you were in your car.
Right.
And so, but you basically didn't get the memo, as in you're dead.
Right.
All right. And then what happens is, well, let's say when that loved one comes for you to tell you, come with me, you're looking at your aunt or your grandma, whoever, and go, you're dead. I'm not going with you, because you still haven't gotten
Right.
that. Dead. I'm dead now. You're still in. So
Still
you
want
get
to
a
stay on
lot
this
of those
plane.
discarnates that they just need for somebody to, they kind of, and by the way, sometimes they do catch on. But they almost need like a living person to kind of hear what happened, or tell them, or say, yeah,
Like to
peace be with
validate
you.
that they really are supposed to go with grandma.
Right, that you're dead, and you know what, you need to go, and then you're
Well, I feel that that's probably a lot of the paranormal part, is somebody just trying to reach out and get noticed or recognized,
Yes,
because they're
yes.
confused and like stuck. I would say that
Yes.
it's not trying to be, evil or haunt anybody. It's kind of more
No.
like, just
No,
recognize me.
you get a lot of and there's something also that what happens is that some of these spirits that have been out of, you want to call it the light, whatever you want to call it, the presence of the divine, in this gray space between being a living person. Because let me tell you something, there's got to be nothing more frustrating than you still being self-aware, but you have no body,
Right.
which you desperate, but you can't. So
Right.
basically you're seeing, for these people, and I'm sure you've heard it, that say, so-and-so haunts and they can stay here. And I was like, do you realize that basically you're telling a human person, because basically it's the spirit of a person,
Right.
I'm going to let you witness the living going on about their lives with something that you can't have anymore, which is a body.
Right.
That's a very bad thing to do.
I was going to say,
it's almost
soul.
like a carrot in front of the horse sort of method. Like you're never going to get to it.
I believe the next world.
Let you look at it and observe it and be a part of it.
I believe the next world has a lot to offer, but
yes,
yeah, but being stuck in this third dimension world as a being would be kind of
without
horrible.
a body,
because it's all built up on this.
It's built around having a body. Like,
yeah,
that's the whole
right,
point
exactly.
of
We're supposed to be here. As long as you have a body, this is where you are supposed to be.
This realm,
Right.
yeah.
Okay. When you don't, now and then you get the spirits that are, they either through religious belief or whatever, maybe they were real pieces of work, and that hell, the fire thing for them is a real consequence of their actions.
They don't want to go.
Oh, yeah.
They're like, hey, you know what?
They're like,
I'll stay
this might not be the best, but forget it. I'll just stick around here.
Take my chances.
Yeah.
Yeah, take my chances.
Yeah, that makes sense, though. I mean, if you, because I've heard a lot of people that, I mean, they're just convinced they're going to hell.
Yeah, and they really do believe it, by the way.
Yeah, and that might be because of the way they grew up, and then the penalties of everything and your sins and whatever else. But that would make sense if you really believe that. The middle ground would be a much better risk.
Right. You don't think about that while you're living.
Yeah.
It's always at the end that you realize, man, that thing about hell, what if it's true?
Yeah, I don't want to burn forever. I'll just sit here and view everybody else.
Exactly. So there's a lot, and again, I'm going to say, even as a subconscious, as a dead person, your subconscious is there, where maybe you grew, when you were a kid, you heard it, and then you lived this life that was like anything but good. But in your subconscious and your belief systems, there is that fire and brimstone kind of fear. That's what you were heard.
No pun intended, but they burn that into you.
Yeah.
The punishment and the sin and whatever else.
Well, or that if you really were a bad person, you're thinking there's got to be some punishment for me somewhere.
Oh yeah. Or you just know that you really are
for your actions.
Or you just or really know you're a bad person.
Right.
That's
exactly.
also there too.
So you get a lot of them that stay back and say, well, whatever. This is not great.
I'll just observe.
Yeah. Right. But by the way, but see what happens is, like all human beings, that personality or that spirit, whatever you want to call it, basically you become worse and worse and worse. Okay. And that's when you get sometimes some really dark, malevolent hauntings, even though it's the origin is a human spirit, is because basically that person, when they were alive, were a real SOB. And then after years out of the presence of the divine, they're like, whoa. And that's when you hear people that go into it and they'll say, oh, I felt something dark and malevolent. And they're immediately thinking demonic. And it's like, you could just really have a dark personality of a human being there.
Well, I was going to say, when they go to some of these hauntings, these locations, and they tell these past stories from 1800s, whatever. You've been here for, well, and let's just say a long time. I don't know what time really is in that sense, but if you've been there a long time and you went through a horrific thing, I think over time you would kind of just be
disgruntled.
You'd just be mischievous and.
Well, no, that mischievous is a kind word. That's
I was going to say. I was just trying to be nice on it, but do some.
Let me ask you something. Haven't
things.
you ever met a live person that when you met that person, you're like, man, I got to get away from this?
You just know they have a dark soul. Right.
Oh, yeah.
This is like and I'm not talking about a dead person. I'm talking about a live person.
Yeah, absolutely.
You just like, no, man, I got to get away from, man. Now, can you imagine that same personality, but dead and frustrated and unhappy as all out?
And 50 years down the road being that dead, unhappy, mean person. Yeah. Or spirit.
Let me tell you something. That's when you see people walk in there and they have that bad feeling or that evil feeling and things like that. That sometimes is the origins. And the reason why I say that is sometimes I think they use that demon word too much. They overuse it.
Right.
Where sometimes you can really have just a bad human being. By the way, that doesn't mean though that they shouldn't be taken and released.
Yeah.
Whatever. I was going to
say, oh, actually, release would probably help everybody's cause, even them.
Yeah, of course.
But yeah, the demon. Well, I think it's hard to label anything in that sense, also, though. So when it's overused,
people don't even understand the difference between a demon and, like you said, negative energy spirit. Like as far as like that demon was never a human being.
Well, let's because there's another theory, and you could have let's say you have this real dark person, this bad person, like you said, you meet him and man, there's just something coming off of you. That person could have an attachment of a demon. Okay. Now what happens is that demon is piggyback on that spirit. When that person passes away, okay, that human spirit, by the way, they still have with them the attachment of a non-human entity. So basically you get two for the price of one. All right.
Yeah, that wouldn't be good at all.
So they could be using that dark energy person's spirit.
Of course, basically, maybe that person present. Maybe that person in life was as dark as they were because of the attachment they had. And then when they die, it's not like it decouples. It's still you still have a demon piggybacking on that soul, driving it again, almost like a puppet, if you want. And that's but I'm saying that's something that people don't realize a lot as far as to explain certain behavior.
Well, that's actually part of the reason, like when I was growing up, we were raised heavily in the church and I was never allowed around like a Ouija board. And I personally said, I won't allow my children to use them either. And even as an adult, I'm saying like, it's one of those things where I don't know how to fly a plane. So I'm not going to get in the cockpit sort of thing because, and I was always told, because you could open the door and we're talking to grandma, but really you're talking to something that's attached to, and you're opening doors and bringing in things that you don't know. Exactly. Yeah. So you're opening doors that you don't know how to close, number one, and you don't even, you don't understand what you're doing.
I was just about to ask you if you believed in Ouija boards and if you ever dabbled with one. Just about that.
I have, but I'm very careful. And one time I had a guest that gave me a great analogy and I was like, man, I got to use that. And basically it's what it is, especially when it's somebody that's inexperienced, unless you know how to open a session, close a session, ask for protection, et cetera, et cetera. He says, it's almost like if you throw a cellular phone in a prison yard, who do you think is going to get that phone? The worst, baddest,
whoever, exactly. Whoever,
SOB in that yard.
Running the yard,
right. King of the hill
is the one that's going to pick up that phone.
It. Right. So the strongest, most
so when people go in there and they open up a session, guess what? Guess who's going to answer? Who's going to come in? Who's going to be able to elbow everybody else out of the way?
It's not going to be grandma.
Oh, hell no. And they know, especially, people think that these spirits, some of them, if they're malevolent, that they can be very manipulative, by the way. All right.
Absolutely.
And it's manipulation. They invade, they start going into nightmares. And
I was going to say, that would be your biggest advantage.
Psychological warfare.
Yeah, exactly.
People, contrary to what people think, as far as, because of the movies that, furniture's flying across the room and you're being pulled out of bed by your feet. They unravel your life in nightmares, lack of sleep, psychological warfare. That's how they got time on their side. They're not in a hurry. They don't have a timeline.
They have eternity.
Okay, and this is the thing that people don't realize. The aim, and by this I mean a non-human entity, their aim is corruption of the human soul.
Yeah.
The longer it takes, the unhappier they make you, the more human anguish they cause. They don't want you to die. They don't want that.
They want to put you on a 30-year plan. They want to
roll
absolutely.
this out and if we can go beyond the 30 into the 40.
Right.
And by the way, along the way, we're going to let you do things to really make a lot of people unhappy and miserable around you, by the way.
To let that spawn out into other things.
Yes.
So now they're suffering. So other negative entities can attach to them on the way down.
Exactly. It's like a ripple effect.
Right.
Well, in a non-physical world, that's what you have is
mental
warfare.
All you're going to do is attach to. Right?
Yeah. So that's why I'm saying that. And if you talk to some, if you read some exorcists, especially the priests, they say that a lot of this gyration and this whatever they want, they say that's window dressing. That's just like, don't worry about that. Because basically what this thing wants is to use you, besides making your life miserable as long as they can, is to use you as an instrument to negatively affect anybody and everybody that's around you. Okay, because that is what it feeds on. That is its aim.
Yeah, I think I'm sold on not doing a Ouija board now. I always kind of wanted to, just because I was the curiosity, but
well, you know what? And you also and I tell everybody, how they talk about objects having attachments. I tell everybody sometimes, you know how people leave out things out on their curb. Say you got to be real careful. By the way, I'm not saying that. I would never, if antique store, curbside pickup, garage sale, I would sage that, smudge it down, sage it, holy water, whatever your belief system is. I'm not saying there's any one, and before you bring it in, and if you ever come across something that it's nice and it's great price, but you just gives you a bad vibe, leave it. Okay. Because I've heard again of people, of investigations, this has been in more recent times, where when we start doing a time, like when did this start happening? What was the triggering event? And, because a lot of times, and then they start like, okay, well, and then this, and then this, and all of a sudden it's when they brought a certain object into the house. They've lived in the house for X amount of time. They don't have any new person in the house. There's nothing that and all of a sudden when they start, it's like, well, you know what, when we bought or brought or whatever, it's like, oh, really? And then everything starts to fall into place.
Yeah.
And
an antique store would seem like a place where that would thrive.
So you just got to be a little bit careful when you bring things into your house, as far as I've had clients who, and that, I tell them, when you're moving into a place, you should, a lot of people traditionally get the house blessed or things like that. And I said, I don't care how beautiful the house looks, if it's freshly painted, whatever. I said, you should, whether you want to do holy water or a blessing through whoever your religious, smudge it, whatever. I said, because there's such a thing that's not necessarily a ghost, it's called negative energy. And let me explain. You might have a room that was used by a sick person for a long time. Okay. This was the sick room. They're never going to tell you. There's nothing wrong with it. There's nothing that they're going to disclose real estate wise, as in somebody was murdered here.
Right.
But maybe you had an older person or somebody that had some type of disease that lingered there. They're not in the hospital, but basically, for lack of a better word, they suffered in that room.
Right.
When you get the place, you have no idea. Bottom line, things of this nature can imprint on the fabric of that place. Okay. If you had some type of dysfunction within that family, by the way, I don't mean regular stuff. I mean something like bad and long, for a long time. Yeah. That's when it becomes, that's also the source of some residual hauntings. That's why you need to cleanse before you move in. So I'm sure you've heard of people that say, man, once we moved into a place, we're having fights, or, hey, when we started using that room, some person became sick, or they started having nightmares and blah, 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 blah.
So it might not even be
this is the kind of information they don't disclose to you when you buy a place.
So it might not be, it might not even be, like you're saying, it might not even be an actual person or, anything like that, like a discarnate. It would just actually be the negative energy that they imprinted on the property.
Yes. People say, oh, I get chills, or I got a bad feeling, and they're thinking ghosts. And it's like, it might not be a ghost per se is what you're thinking. It's that something is there that your senses are picking up on, that it's like either it was a lot of arguing or really bad things happened, and you're just like, your senses are grabbing it. And a same thing as far as like when I said the sick room, where, you know, you have some people then they display the symptoms and they can't understand, you know, what the origins are. And sometimes, not that they manifest that disease, but some of the symptoms or the feelings that that person that was there had. And it's, again, you rent a place, you buy a place, they're not going to disclose. They don't have to. And there's no reason why they should tell you, you know, for 5 years, their sick aunt used that room.
Suffered in that room, yeah.
Right, in-home
And
hospice
she
care.
was, you know, yeah, at the end, she died in the hospital for 5 years, but she lingered there for as this disease progressed, you know, with her.
Yeah, there'll be a lot of lingering negative energy, for sure.
Sure.
For sure.
And that's why you have to be careful in that sense, as far as when you're going to have a place to live. And then my last thing, that as a matter of fact, I addressed it not too long ago on my show, was, you know, a lot of people will tell me, you know, how do I keep out negative energies and stuff like that? Because again, this is not just attachments. This is just funky stuff coming off of people. And I tell them, you know, you can salt or smudge, salt your doorways. And then I've had people come and tell me, you know what, after I did that, I have a bunch of people that they'll come to my house, or even family members, or they want to meet me out. Well, I don't know. Like,
they don't want,
you know,
to
what's
be
wrong?
in that area that's blessed.
Exactly. People sometimes have attachment themselves that once you did that, guess what? They don't feel comfortable coming to where you're at,
well, that's not a good
or
thing.
being there for long. They've said, I've had people that said they were going to spend the day with me, and within half an hour, they tell me, oh, I got to go. And then from then on, all they want to do is meet me someplace else for dinner or for a movie. And I said, well, this is what you did. You basically put up a barrier. And if that person has an attachment, whether it's a parasitic attachment, as in conscious, or just bad negative energy, they're bouncing off of it. And they don't understand themselves. I'm not telling you they consciously do it, but that's why they feel uncomfortable being in your place. And they go, oh, that makes sense. And I said, that's what happens.
I kind of get that feeling when people say they don't like dogs. You know, I feel the same way. Like, it just like sends off a bad vibe right off the bat. I don't know what it is. I'm like, yeah, you don't like dogs, and dogs don't like you. I feel like
dogs. Oh, well, I'm an animal lover, but
yeah, I just feel like that.
But
there's
yeah,
something
but I know that there's
negative there.
animals that sense that. You'll hear stories of people wigging out, like.
Yeah, well, I mean, usually if you don't like a dog, it's because dogs don't like you.
And if dogs don't like you, it's
yeah.
I like animals, but I know there's certain dogs that's like, man, I'm not gonna. I know that you're like.
Well, I meant like in general.
I know.
Somebody I know that they just got bit by a dog recently too, that on my property. But he's like, I hate dogs, and this dog, I mean, it's not mean to anybody else, but this thing, I mean, hated him.
Yeah.
It was trying to jump through the car windows at him, and I'm like, man, what
kind
deal?
Was it? Was it a bully dog?
It was a pit bull, but. And the pit bull was a little questionable, but it was nice to everybody else. It's just, and he even admitted, I don't get along with dogs. And then I think if a dog doesn't like you that much, either you've teased it a lot or just some energy coming off you.
It's like, hey, not everybody's on the still. I love animals, but as a matter of fact, I recently have a pit bull, a beautiful blue one across the street from me. Never got out. You know, they're fantastic climbers, by the way.
Absolutely. Yeah, they can climb straight up a wall.
Oh my. Yeah. Well, guess what? He's climbing out and jumping into my place, and I have yippy little dogs.
I was gonna say, it sounds like you have like little 3-pounders floating around.
Let me tell you something. I have 9 dogs. Okay, but anyway, and one time I'm on my back porch and I'm looking, and his name is, by the way, is Blue. Here's Blue staring at me. My dogs are going crazy, and I was looking. I was like, what are these dogs barking at? All of a sudden, I look out the back porch door, and here's Blue looking at me, and I'm like, oh, that's a scary looking dog.
Yeah, they do give off that vibe, like, oh man, I don't want to fuck with that.
And then another time he did that twice to me, and basically he was getting out from where they had him. They have to repen him somewhere, because he's one of these dogs that will bite through like anything.
Yeah, exactly.
And I have chickens too, and I was like, my chickens.
Fox in the hen house.
I have no chickens left.
Those chickens won't last. If
By the way, I gotta ask you. You know what would have made me quit paranormal investigations? If I would have met anybody like what's sitting behind you guys.
That's Kane. He does all of our research. He's kind of the quiet type. He just observes.
Let me tell you something. He reminds me of Pumpkinhead with a hoodie.
Oh, great reference.
Yeah.
It's like, whoa.
Well,
And
I
come
kind
across-
of started it
I love that reference.
When
Like
we-
that, like that's
when I had a
people
time
don't
where I
even
was
know
Like,
what pumpkin
yeah.
that is.
when I was doing some solo episodes. It was fun to bounce something off of, and then we just kept him ever since. So
Let me
Kane's just
tell
been a
you.
part of it.
That is that is like it's hard not to look at him. I'm sorry. He's like, you guys, he could just
He's
step
just
away because it's all
involved,
about
right?
him.
Well, he's going to be a part of the show once we get into the new studio. He's going to be a little bit more,
more
of
vocal.
Yeah.
I bet. Well,
So
let
we
me
got
tell you
some
something.
ideas.
That's it. He's gonna steal the show. I can tell you right now.
Yeah. He's definitely an icon now. He has to stay with
So
us.
question, do you feel okay, so like you were talking about, if someone's not religious,
Right.
you're saying that in order to get rid of the attachments, they would need to bring more guns to pull them off, because is that
Well,
what you were saying? I just wanted to like understand that, because if I was religious and you brought in a priest, that priest would have a lot of impact. But if I was, not religious and you brought in a priest, I'm like, you could have brought in Bill from the gas station and he would have
Right,
as much
exactly.
impact as
And
the
if
priest
you don't
would.
believe in it, but I'll tell you what, you want to make people a true believer real quick. That'll do it for you. But no, absolutely, belief is the cornerstone of everything. If you don't believe in it at some level, and
Or the
I've heard
person
of
that's
people that are
doing it.
agnostic, that
Right.
these experiences basically they're not agnostic anymore. They realize
They found
that there is good and
religion
evil there.
through that.
Right. Sometimes
wow.
I would think that you'd have to, if you went through something traumatic, like, any kind of event like that, that you'd almost have to try to put a title on what the hell was happening, just for your own,
Well,
your own mental status.
and what a lot of people think also when they see these shows is that you have a like a clap of thunder and boom, and they do the exorcism and it's over. And not really. Whenever you are involved in something like that, you have to keep up a schedule of prayer, or if you want to call it prayer, cleansing your home. You got to keep that up. It's not like that. It's over,
Like you're
because those things
refortifying
can
over and
seep
over.
back in. Okay. And a lot of people have a hard time realizing that this is not like, okay, it's done, right? Thanks.
Yeah.
And as a matter of fact, I wrote a book called Supernatural Safety, which it's a DIY book for people, because one of the biggest problems people also have is they give up their power very easily, and they don't realize that, let's say for the example of your house, if you order something out, you have the power. If this is your home, who do you think has more authority? If somebody walked in the front door of your house, what would you tell them? You'd say, get the out of here
Right.
right now.
At least
You
that.
mean it. Where somebody else, a third party does it, it's so basically it's like a lot of people give their control very easily away, not realizing how much power they have. And I tell them, and you pointed that out earlier, Jake. You pointed that out, as human beings with a body, where we're supposed to be. This dimension is, we hold dominion here because we're alive and we have a body.
Right.
So anything trying to get around that is like, you have the power to tell them, get out. Okay. And a lot of people, unfortunately, they're like, oh no. It's like,
Yeah.
and in the book, I kind of
so it's a
specify a couple of times when you're like,
so-
hey, you're out of your depth here, go get some help. But that helpless feeling doesn't help at all.
No.
On the
So that
contrary.
explains in the book that you said you have. Because
Mhm.
by the way, we're gonna have all the links below the show notes.
Okay, thank you.
So you'll have to send those on
Yep.
email, but
Mhm.
we'll put all those below so that you can find her book, and so it's more of a self-help on people that want to take charge in those situations. On the one book you
Right.
said, yeah,
Yeah.
that'd be good.
For example, a lot of people don't realize that when you use salt, you have to bless that salt, even in exorcisms. A lot of people think the water has to be blessed. The salt has to be blessed. You can do your own blessing. If by this, I'm not saying this is, whatever your belief is,
Right.
you can do your own blessing, but a lot of people don't realize that whatever you use as an instrument has to be blessed to begin with.
Right.
But I mean, there's a lot of practical stuff. And at the beginning, I say, there's a couple of instances where I'll tell you, this is what you're experiencing. It's like, put on the brakes, stop, and go get help. You right now need somebody to come and help you, whether it's a group or clergy.
I was gonna say,
there's a
just like
lot
Jacob
of
said, if you're not familiar with it, go find somebody that is to help you get to whatever you're trying to
But
achieve.
you know what's going to happen? That what people don't realize is when everybody picks up their stuff and leaves, you're still left there living there.
Yeah.
or even when there's an investigation going on, you're still the one that's
Yeah.
left behind with
True,
your
true.
family. You have got to be an active participant in whether it's
Right.
You
prayer
have to be able to do
or,
something for
hey,
yourself to keep it together.
right,
Yeah.
going outside and opening up your shades and laughing. I tell everybody, oh, you got to be kidding. I said, you'd be surprised how powerful laughter is in circumstances where people think they're losing their mind,
Oh yeah.
where they think that something, I know this is dramatic, is imperiling their soul or one of their family members. You know, like if you've got a teenager or things like that.
Well, that's
The
kind of
more,
like funerals and stuff. I'm not good at that.
well, you got to be real careful with funerals.
Yeah. Well,
Real careful.
so I kind of try
Well,
to do some stupid humor once in a while, but that's what
Do you
comes
think that
out.
that's more of like a big portal? Like obviously we know, like is that what that
Okay.
is that what you're saying? Is that like a
one
is that
time
like
I
a
had
huge
somebody
like
tell
beacon
me,
sign,
oh,
like all discarnates come here?
okay.
Maybe.
One person told me, oh, well, you know what? I don't think cemeteries are haunted because if you're going to haunt, why would you go to the cemetery? I said, okay, number one, you will get a lot of people who died and they're not really sure they're dead. So they follow their body around. They follow it from the medical examiners over to the funeral home. And if you're not cremated, they follow it to the cemetery and the burial. And they're hanging out. They kind of like get it, but they really, like you said, they need somebody to tell them from the living, go, you're dead.
Yeah.
State you need, I've done it.
Right.
I've stated the obvious to them. You're dead. And in the book, I tell people, you got to tell them that. I said, but besides that you get that discarnate hanging out, a lot of dark magic ritual work and items are disposed of in or around cemetery grounds. A lot. Okay. And people don't realize that because it is consecrated and hallowed ground, a lot of people will put in a spirit that they want to bind in there because it won't leave. They used it for something and they will bind it in there. I've come across that because I've gone to cemeteries. You'd be surprised some of the things that I have found.
Like
Especially when you're in South Florida.
like trinkets or something along like
Trinkets, dead animals.
That makes sense,
if they're doing you know, and the reason why I say dark magic is usually if you're practicing any other type of ritual which is not dark, you don't worry about disposing of the items. You know, like I need to get rid of this at the cemetery or around it. There's certain root works that they use what they call graveyard dirt or coffin nails, you know, things that are related to dead.
Yeah.
Almost like what you said. And there definitely is sometimes, because also people go in there, depending on where the cemetery is located. Either they know what they're doing or the worst kind, they don't know what they're doing and they open up a doorway.
I was going to say, a lot of people do
doing some
Ouija
ceremony
boards in
and
those places.
whatever. And and they think, oh, this is stupid, let's leave. And it worked. You know, the beginner's luck kind of deal.
Right.
Yeah.
So yes, cemeteries. And then you also have something that's called a cemetery sentinel. Okay. Cemetery sentinels are non-human. Okay. The cemetery sentinels, sometimes they appear on their own. Sometimes they're invoked as in to guard cemeteries. Now, the reason why you get they hang out and they're non-human. Okay. And the way they work is it's almost like a tilting point where you have to have X amount of dead people. And what they feed off is the anguish and grieving of families when they come to that graveyard. They don't do anything to you, but this is what, for lack of a better word, how they get their fix. But when you get somebody that goes in there that starts desecrating graves, oh, the last thing you want is attention from one of these things, because then your life will be hell. Okay. Though, like sometimes they're invoked and sometimes they will appear, and basically they're sentinels. They're sentinels at that cemetery. Okay. And they don't interfere with regular people going in and out and putting flowers, or as a matter of fact, if you're there crying, they're probably hanging out. Oh yeah. But when you get people going in there doing stupid stuff, desecration or things, a lot.
Yeah, I was going to say,
let me tell you something. Get one of those things off your back and detach them and stop paying attention. Because by the way, this is an elemental type of spirit. You can't exorcise this. All right. You don't send it to the great hereafter. It is an elemental, and your best bet is trying to get it detached and not pay attention to you anymore. And that is hard. That's why when people go into cemeteries, you have to be real careful what you do. And a lot of times they're very tall, but a lot of times you'll see them If there's trees, you look up and they'll be looking. Sometimes you'll see a shadow, or sometimes it'll look like an animal that you're thinking, what was that on that tree limb?
Yeah.
Right.
And that's a cemetery sentinel. There's a lot of stuff in cemeteries that can complicate your lives.
So if they go in
a
and
lot of
do
ways.
Ouija boards, they're invoking probably a sentinel. Then
No, you
Possibly.
cannot
No,
invoke a sentinel.
they're
A sentinel
opening
cannot
up-
be invoked
Yeah,
that
they're
way.
Oh,
opening up
okay.
doors for spirits and whatnot.
okay. So
I
you,
did have a
No.
question. Though.
A sentinel can come in there. A sentinel can come in there just because it wants to pick up on the grief. It basically
It absorbs
where
the
people
grief.
come to grief.
Right.
The
I
grief,
just didn't
The
know if,
grief
like,
is what attracts it.
Exactly.
I didn't
right,
just
yeah.
know if
Yes.
somebody went in and did a Ouija board,
there's
they
a
could attach themselves to
there's
the
a-
person doing the Ouija
No,
board.
you know what? If somebody did a Ouija board, nah, they wouldn't have that much problem. The sentinel will probably be looking at them. The problem walks in when they desecrate. But basically, you're disturbing what their source of
Okay,
their
that
attraction
makes
is.
sense.
Well, there's a
Okay, and
there's
sometimes even when the cemeteries after a while close down, that no more burials are allowed, a lot of sentinels will still stay there because they're bound and they just stay there. So even when you go to some of these old cemeteries that nobody's ever being buried there anymore, you still will have a sentinel there. It's not human and it's not a demon and it's an elemental. You cannot exorcise it. It doesn't understand religious rituals. Okay, it doesn't have a moral compass like you. You can't
Right.
bargain with it.
Right.
Okay,
there's
so
a
yes.
movie. There's a movie called Odd Thomas, and they called him Bodaks. Is what they called him in that movie.
Yes.
But that's exactly. So you're familiar.
In
with,
a
like,
way,
What was that?
like the movie's Odd Thomas, but
Right,
they're
the
called Bodaks, but they're
Bodaks-
attracted to a negative. Like they're something negative is
right,
about to happen.
that explosion of right, which that's a great example. The Bodaks basically is that they're attracted to that a great amount of human suffering,
Right.
loss, and you will even as a matter of fact, you will even hear stories of people in wars. You know, before when people would be out in the fields, that they will see something Bodak like is basically when you go to war and there's that extreme human suffering or loss of life,
Right.
you will have their stories of soldiers that recovered from their wounds seeing something like that.
In the voyeuristic thing just to be a part of the negative energy.
Right, which is what the Bodaks, when you look at Odd Thomas, that's what attracted them. But these they're not in the sense of they don't want to. The Bodaks more were opportunistic. A cemetery sentinel kind of stays down there, and they're not. If you go in there and you cry, or they're not going to mess with you.
But they're just going to absorb some of that grief energy.
Yes, right, exactly, exactly.
So there's a cemetery in the town that I'm from. We live on the Iowa-Illinois border. I'm from the Iowa side, but there's a cemetery that is one of the oldest cemeteries in the area. About 150 years old, and there's 4 mausoleums that have a perimeter around them with 2 giant billy goats walking on the perimeter with them. I'll send you some of the videos through email just to get your idea of because I'm blown away and I have no idea what they're there for, what their purpose is. The mausoleums themselves have been bricked up, so there's no access to the mausoleums from family. But they're just segregated. There's about 12 there's like 8 mausoleums, but only 4 or 5 of them are segregated with this makeshift electric fence with 2 giant billy goats, horns. I'm talking about a 4-foot horn span. And it just does not seem like when you see the video. I just
so
don't
you mean that whoever these are real live animals then?
Real life 2 giant
statues?
billy goats no, they are walking, living billy goats walking on the so you have a strip of mausoleums, and all of these mausoleums, the most recent mausoleum is from 1910. They've all been bricked up, but 4 out of the 8 are segregated with a makeshift electric fence, and there's 2 billy goats walking inside of that electric fence, like basically patrolling the grounds around these mausoleums.
The only thing I can think of right off the bat is a lot of these older cemeteries, they're basically the maintenance is done by whoever's left around. In other words, there's no owner of the cemetery that comes and mows the grass.
Well, I would have thought it was just the grass, but it's literally just these 4. And it doesn't change. It's just these 4.
Right. And it's almost like, is it the same family?
No, 4
is
separate
it the same
families.
Family, the mausoleums?
4 separate families.
4 separate families. unless somebody that I can think of is like, you know what, this is the cheap. And by the way, I don't know. This is just me like guessing. How can I keep the grass
and the
cropped,
weeds
basically?
down.
Yeah.
Right. That would be
Right.
the
You know,
assumption,
putting
but
a
they
billy goat.
feed
But
them
that
though.
is so
But they feed
unusual.
them though.
That
Like
is
when we
way
went
out there.
there was actually there's like watermelon and other things actually
Yeah,
feeding the
somebody's
goats on top of. So it like I would think that
Is
it's
there any
beyond just
story with
like
it?
I don't like so I've researched as much as I can beyond the people. I'm sorry it came in half cocked, but we researched the people that are a part of the families, a part of the mausoleum. There is very minimal information. Like even with if you go through the manifest of who is all in the cemetery, that
right.
mausoleum literally has that family name with the date, but it has nothing beyond that. It has no like who's in the mausoleum, when was it set up, none of that. The only reason I have the dates is because it's in the concrete on the wall when it was originally
Right. It
established.
etched it.
Right, exactly.
And do they have the name of the family at all etched outside as far as reference?
On the wall, absolutely. But when you go to the directory through the cemetery directory, it doesn't have any of the information other than they have a mausoleum here. It'll just say that's the family, and yes, it's here. But the people inside
you know
aren't
what?
listed. And
I don't know if you've gone on this site. It's called findagrave.com. Okay. And I work a lot with them because when people need, if let's say especially for people doing genealogy research, you can ask somebody in a certain part of, let's say, the country. Let's say your grandmother lived there 50 years ago and she's buried there. You can ask that person to take a picture. But go to Find a Grave. They've got all the cemeteries all over the world. Okay. When you go on a certain cemetery, it'll tell you what percentage of it has been photographed. You know, like as you know, people will go in there and they'll upload the images.
Right.
And you might find information at Find a Grave if you find that cemetery per se, and they might have information on, because that's a great story. Let me tell you.
It blew like literally like when I first heard it, I didn't believe it. And then like I've been back there a couple times now. And like I said, these are full grown billy goats. Huge horns.
For a minute there, when you started saying, I was like, they put up statues of billy goats.
I thought the statue the same thing. I was like,
you think about like the goat within like demonic, like the demonic like rituals.
Yeah. That's exactly what I was going. That's like, wow.
Like so then it's like, wow, you got these giant billy goats.
The image of Satan with hoofs,
these handful of
weird symbolism.
It's just a weird connection.
I was thinking you meant statues too, and I'm like, that seems kind of.
No, I'll take you there, Jake. It'll blow your mind.
Go to Find a Grave, and they might be able to give you information maybe on the family.
Yeah, absolutely will.
Yeah, I didn't know this story, but now I'm interested in these billy goats. What's going on there?
That's way out there.
Yeah.
Because people don't realize that these old ones, you know, once the families either move or die, that's it. The upkeep, that's where you find a lot of these old graveyards. They're like decrepit, where you stumble across them and they're like, oh my God, there's a graveyard here, because that's it. The upkeep is basically nobody's there.
When you stop selling plots, you don't have the money to maintain.
No, I found those some of these smaller towns. Basically, it's like everybody agrees that's got, because they what they do is you bury your loved one for free. You know, it's not like one of these regular cemeteries, you know, where they charge you. Basically, you get somebody to go out there, you bury, but the agreement is that the people, the families, do the upkeep.
That makes sense.
Yeah. So.
Well, well, it was a good conversation nonetheless, but Jacob, do you have anything else you'd like to add?
I am quite sure I'll have 30 more questions the moment I walk outside to my car and say, why didn't I ask that?
Well, how about we leave it at this?
For this time.
How about we leave it at this? Would you like to come back on another time and maybe do another
session? Absolutely. I'm about to put out a new book about true crime. I'm hoping to release it by September. And maybe we could talk about that, because when I do a lot of research,
we love true crime stuff too. Come across some very
disturbing murders that never get recognition. And
okay,
the good old days, you had disturbed people.
So, okay, I thought about that. That is a forever question. So, do you think, or how do you feel about when people say like with like demonic possession or even influence, or however you look at it, when you have these people that are like ritualistic serial killers and things of that nature? Do you think that they are that they're being embodied, or that they're being influenced? Somebody's meshed with it. Like, how do you or do you just think that they are or all the above? Or
there's a certain percentage of the population which are born psychopaths. by this, everybody immediately thinks of a psychopath as going around killing everybody. A psychopath basically has no remorse, but unless you have a violent streak, you're not going around killing. You're just into controlling people.
Right.
But you're into controlling people, and you're a real pain in the neck. But then one of the common denominators that you have in a lot of these serial killers, is that they had some type of trauma in their childhood, whether it's sexual abuse and or physical, mental abuse, usually more than once, at the hands of a family member or something. And I want to say that in almost all the instances, whether you end up becoming a scourge on society by killing people, or you're just a disturbed person, that wound, that opens the doorway for some really dark attachments, really bad. So yes, to your question, I want to say that a lot of these people that do these horrible things, it's almost like they are, and by the way, once they get that attachment very early in life, it's very difficult for them to differentiate between themselves and that they have, if you want to call it,
matured with it. Like
right, exactly.
Oh yeah, they've lived with it. Yeah.
They've matured with it, and they don't recognize it. And a lot of times you will have, in some instances, not all the times, where they will say they don't remember the actual part of where they killed somebody. Also, you do have the thing of mental illness, and a lot of people think that either you're possessed or you've got mental illness. And the truth is, one doesn't exclude the other. Yeah. You could have a mental illness and you could still have some type of obsession, of possession, working together. As a matter of fact,
yeah, it's probably more dangerous,
more susceptible,
aggravating it. So that I think that yes, absolutely. Those really horrific cases that you think about, absolutely, there's something there. But and a lot of people, even if they've tried the defense, I don't know if you remember in the Amityville Horror, the DeFeo family that was killed. At one point, the oldest son was the one that killed the family, and they were trying to go with that. They looked at that plea of like that he was possessed because he says he couldn't remember. Right. It's a real difficult thing to prove. As a matter of fact, they're about to come out with, I want to say it's on the Discovery Channel, called The Devil Made Me Do It case. It's a real...
Yeah. I know exactly what you're talking about.
Okay. That was a very early case that the Warrens were involved in. Okay.
I'll ask about them as well.
And in that thing, you're going to see that they did use the plea when he was being tried. I don't want to be a spoiler on it. For the murder, they were doing the possession angle because of what had happened within the family. Which, by the way, eventually, I mean, this...
Has that ever worked in court? By chance,
No. You know what? You have a better chance of saying insanity. And of course, that you're found insane by psychiatrists that will say this person is... And see, I don't think they do that anymore, but once upon a time, if you were going up for trial, let's say for murder, you were being charged with murder, and what they call alienists or psychiatrists said that you were insane, you would go to a psychiatric hospital. Right. And if they deemed you were cured, guess what?
You go for trial.
Yeah.
You would go free.
Yeah, nowadays you go for trial, though. Once
you go back to trial.
Well, it's because people used it.
Right. Once upon a time, if they said you were really, and they cured you,
they cured you of your craziness.
Of your craziness. And, you get a lot of horrific results because of that. Because some of these people, there's a compulsion in them. They can't help but kill.
Yeah, I was going to say they get back out and do it again. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a compulsion. Nice. You would think after being, no, they can't control themselves.
I was going to say, I think that's great. Yeah. When you say that book was coming
that's like far beyond influence. Then, like, would that be on the level of possession, or like, how? Like,
well, see, this is the thing: is that they say you could be obsessed most of the time and then fall into possession for maybe a couple of hours. Okay.
Right.
And then you bounce back to obsession where you're that person. Okay. And you're obsessed, and then at that point, then you go into it's not like you're possessed 24/7.
It literally sounds like if you listen to like the Ted Bundy tapes, like that's what sounds like you're talking about.
Yes.
Like he's a very articulate, great person. Like he says a very nice guy when you're talking to him, and then he has these moments where he's overwhelmed with obsession to where he has to go and do these things. Like it's not even a choice at that matter.
Right. But also a lot of these, if they're a psychopath, early in life, they learn how to mimic emotion because they realize when I don't mimic emotion, people look at me weird.
Right.
Yeah, and that's what you don't
and
want.
You'll see some of these people that they've done away with their, let's say their wives or their husbands, and the police catch on because this person the next week is dating somebody else and going on the
just
town.
Moved on.
Yeah.
And they don't, and people go, man, you're stupid. And said they don't get it. People think, how? Don't you think somebody's going to look at you and go, I thought you would be heartbroken? They don't get it. But some of them are really good at mimicking, heartbreak. I'm going to catch whoever it is. Help me,
Yeah.
And, but yeah, they, that's a manipulation. They learn normal people. You have pity, you have empathy. Somebody stands there and says, I'm sorry, or you see somebody crying, and the next thing you're crying too. Oh my God.
I was gonna say they
know
probably
how
even
that
study
manipulation. They're very good at it.
Yeah.
They're very
When
good
did you say
at
that
it.
book was going to come out? True Crime? Did you say soon?
It's going to be September. I'm hoping to. I don't have the exact date. It's called Hot Dame on a Cold Slab: Film Noir Murders #2. That's a real. It's
Hot Dame on a Cold Slab.
I was going to say, when you release that, if you want to come on, and then we can talk about
we'll
true
talk
crimes.
about it.
Yeah.
I put out and basically they're all true. They're all true crime. And there's a lot of cases like the Black Dahlia that got publicity every which way. But during those years, and I used that because that's when they were trying to catch up a little bit as far as investigating crimes, without the use of DNA.
Right.
Or forensics as we know it with, basically the best they had was fingerprints, and things like that.
Yeah, and weapons that are actually.
But the fingerprints were shaky even in like the 60s.
Even the fingerprints, it was like, it was. There was, but still, there was when you see that trying to, and when they started realizing, what, there's the usual suspects, but you always got to look, especially when it was a stranger on stranger crime, that sometimes there is no connection. The majority of times there is, but there's times, which by the way are the most difficult ones to solve. But that's what, there was a lot of cases that you say the good old days, man, there was a lot of disturbed people in the good old days. And a lot of them never got caught either, by the way.
Yeah, I was going to say, maybe it was more or less that those behaviors, they just knew that if they were smart enough, they'd get away with it. Now it's kind of like,
you know what? I'm going to tell you. You want me to tell you who are the ones that never get caught? The ones that shut up. How many of these guys get caught because they talk, they go to prison, they tell somebody, because know that lady that they thought, that was me.
Right.
There's a lot of smart ones out there that they shut up. They don't say anything to anybody, nobody. And what was it? That Golden Gate Killer rapist, the one that they got him 2 years ago based on DNA through family. Yeah. He had gotten away since the 70s. And that they did it because one of his family members submitted one of those
the 23
ancestry things.
Yeah. Yep.
And they, somewhere along the line, because at one point they thought it was a different person who was the rapist and the killer.
Went to Oakland, San Francisco, and down to Southern California at one point.
Yeah.
And somewhere along the line they find, because this takes a long time, they put his DNA in the system, and this family member ruined it for him. Did one of those, hey, what's my pie chart look like?
Yeah. There's a second cousin of this person on your mother's side.
And somebody got a match and said, hey, it looks like. Right. That's how he got caught.
40-some years later.
That's crazy. We actually have a case.
Well, that was an Iowa case like that it went.
I was going to say, even Trudy Appleby, that now one of the family members that had died had said something, and now they're trying to look back into it. And it's, I don't even know how many years that is. 25 at least.
Yeah, 25 exactly. Actually.
And what was that case about? What was it? A famous
12-year-old girl.
Trudy Appleby, she went missing, but then now the guy that was family friend or whatever else lived on Campbell's Island, close by. He had said some things. Somebody was trying to get out of jail and sent him the other way, digging up this island, and then it kind of got back to now they kind of know where the last place she was seen at by one of these family member friends or something, and now they're looking into even trying to just get the disclosure for the family, really.
So let me ask you, was she ever found?
No.
They never found her body.
Nothing.
Nope.
So basically, which once upon a time, no victim, no crime.
Yeah.
And to get some, some type of conviction on circumstantial.
Back in 1997, it was no victim, no crime world.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. And they and whoever knows, they kind of know that.
Well, that's what they're saying, that on this Campbell's Island, that they on this property there might be a possible finding of these bones finally, but I mean, it's hard to say what they're going to do with it now. There was actually a couple people that wanted to make a documentary, and then they were investigating the people that investigated, and they were saying that they might reopen it for.
You know what I found though, and this is sometimes when you look at some of these cold cases, especially like when years pass, they overlook a lot of good clues. And I don't know if it's because they're overloaded with work, or they're getting too many tips, or it's just what's a nice word of putting them? Somebody didn't know what they were doing as far as investigating. But sometimes when, these cold cases, they reopen them, they get a new set of eyes 30 years later. They find stuff sometimes in evidence boxes. Right. They're like, that's in here?
Well, that's kind of what's happening, is the person that wanted to do the documentary started coming across some stuff, and they thought, well, maybe this isn't done now.
Maybe this is an important person to talk to. Let's listen to what this person said.
Right. Or stuff that somebody dropped in whatchamacallit, in a box, and it just, and I guess sometimes
it didn't have relevance 25 years ago, but after you hear something from this person, now all of a sudden that inanimate object actually now that substance to that now.
Or that guy that called in and said, I know. So you have to understand, there's a lot of people, that's confessed to murders because they're kind of cuckoo. But every once in a while, you'll get somebody that they'll get this weird call that gives you information.
Right.
And they're kind of written off as, it's a kook trying to own the murder.
You hear that a lot.
They just want to be a part of it, but that's them almost getting it off their conscious.
That cold case is very interesting, and that's what the book is. It's just, we're talking about crimes that were committed like maybe 100 to 70 years ago in that time frame, where some of them got solved, some of them didn't. Other times they never even really found who the victim was per se. That
leaves an awesome place for us to speak again when your book gets released.
You got
absolutely.
So we will be talking. So
that's awesome. But we do appreciate your time. And I can't wait to have you on once your book is released. You can bring it on to here and then showcase it, and then we can talk about some true crimes.
Please come back anytime.
Okay.
You just have free time in your schedule. Shoot an email, and we will absolutely.
Like, you got it, guys. It's been a pleasure.
As often as possible. Our pleasure is 100% ours.
Absolutely.
Take care.
Thank you very much.
The guy in the middle, be ready to get the guys are gonna have to give him the spotlight. And
that's why he's center stage though. Like he's center stage for a reason.
Well, when we get our new
background dancer,
when we get our new home, he'll be placed and be used a little bit more and not as silent. So,
all right, guys, take care. Bye bye.
Right, thank you
very much.
Bye bye.
Wow, that was a hell of an interview. I know that we used a lot of you guys' time, but I hope you enjoyed it as much as we do. And we did. We are going to close this case file. And with that, I'd say that's TLI approved.
Oh, stamped for approval. Absolutely.
And we'll see you on the next case file. This is the Lost Info Podcast, keeping you awake. Jake.
And Jake.
We out.